Hey everybody, Stephen Regan here, DeKalb Asgrow Technical Agronomist in Minnesota, joining you today to talk about early season seedling diseases for corn and soybeans. So far you guys have talked about what to do before the planters are rolling, during, and even then how to handle things as service calls come up. And one thing I wanted to call out was how do we diagnose those symptoms, understand which pathogens or diseases are present, and then how to protect against them now and in the future as we go forward. So when we talk about diagnosing issues, I look at scouting as obviously a key pillar, and it's not just scouting but being out there timely. So early stages, if we're out there too late, there's other things that have moved in and it's hard to understand what the causal pathogen that really initiated the seedling disease to start with. So beyond that, understanding just cycles and environmental conditions that can influence different diseases, field level considerations like soil type, topography, saturated conditions, all of those things, and understanding or helping us diagnose which disease is actually causing the issue and then what we can do moving forward. So as we dive into soybeans first, we'll talk about the four key diseases: Pythium, Phytophthora, Fusarium, and Rhizoctonia. Now, I'll start with Pythium because this is one that really starts earliest in the season, and I mean that by the coolest temperature requirement. Even below 50 degrees, it can cause infection, and it's a soil-borne pathogen that really prefers those saturated, poorly drained soils. Now, it can infect a seed within 90 minutes, so even a seed that has not germinated yet can be rotted and soaked in watery tissue. But if it does germinate, it typically is going to infect then, and we'll see those soft brown rotting tissue, that rotted hypocotyl. Pythium typically is going to be before we even get to emergence or maybe just a touch after. So true early season issue that we get with Pythium. And this is a water mold, okay? Another water mold would be Phytophthora, and it's very similar symptomology, but more a little bit more progressive growth stages. So this is one that's typical to see that damping off that we talk about. So really when we get into the V1, V2 growth stages and we see those plants that just look like they've melted to the ground, I always think Phytophthora first and then develop the diagnosis from there. But common in those wet, poorly drained soils, a little bit warmer temperature requirement, and one that we know can persist even later into the season. We can find patches of this in fields in July that maybe was infected early, but it really didn't get triggered or take over the plants until later in the season. And we'll talk a little bit more about management on this one in a little bit. Rhizoctonia gets us away from the water molds, and now we're talking about dry lesions, so more of that sunken canker. And Rhizoctonia, you always see that reddish-brown lesion, that firm, dry, definitely different symptomology than the first two, and definitely a warmer temperature requirement for Rhizoctonia. So warmer conditions is going to be more prevalent. Moist soils, so not saturated like the first two, but more of a moist conditions, more prevalent in those medium to coarser textured soils, okay? And then Fusarium, this one's the most complex just from a standpoint that there's more than 22 different species. Some of them like it hot and dry, some of them like it cool and wet. When we do find symptomology for this, and it is Fusarium, it's going to again be those lesions on the taproot and lateral roots, more of that dark brown to tan, sometimes reddish brown, but I'll say if it gets to be reddish brown, typically we need to send in a sample to confirm if it's Rhizoctonia or Fusarium. Now with Fusarium, you're going to find poor nodulation and poor lateral root development. It's typically what we'll see. And again, a below soil line symptomology is most common with Fusarium as well. Now when I look at all four of the seedling diseases kind of on a temperature gradient, Pythium being all the way down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we get to Fusarium, a couple different windows here, Phytophthora in the middle, and then Rhizoctonia really on the warmer end of the spectrum, just calls out to me how critical seed treatments are for that early season protection. Regardless of if we're planting early, mid, or late in the season, depending on the year we're in, the seed treatment is going to give us that protection across that window, across the different diseases or core diseases we're dealing with. Other management tactics, obviously planting good quality seed, trying to have well-drained environments, removing some of those water issues, waiting to plant in the soils that are not wet and cold. Really, we want to wait till soils are fit, staying away from those wet conditions. Fungicidal seed treatments, we talk about the Acceleron package. Pyraclostrobin and fluxpyroxid do a great job for Fusarium and Rhizoctonia control. We use a high rate of metalaxyl that's critical in getting that good Phytophthora control as well as the Pythium. And then when we talk about Phytophthora, using varieties with a known genetic tolerance, so having that Phytophthora root rot rating, as well as if we have an RPS gene, then that's icing on the cake, and we have a solid Phytophthora package for those environments where it's more prone or where we've had that disease in the past. One thing I didn't call out was fluopyrum, so that's the active ingredient for Olevo. Now we know that's going to be highly effective on sudden death syndrome or SDS, and you're probably saying, well, Stephen, we don't see SDS until late July, early mid-August, right? But really that's the foliar expression we're seeing at that timing. Now SDS does infect early. It is a root rot by nature. So although we don't classify it as a seedling disease, this is something we need to think about as we go into this season and seasons forward, is if we have SDS pressure, we've built up that inoculum in the soil, or if we're starting to get concerned that that is moving in our area, we need to be looking at fluopyrum or Olevo as our solid control method for that moving forward. As we transition out of soybeans and move into corn, just want to call out a few things. With corn, there can be some environmental stresses that can mimic certain diseases. We have chilling injury, sometimes can get misattributed as a seedling disease. Phosphorus deficiency, obviously that can show up, but oftentimes a seedling disease can infect or affect root structures that can cause limited phosphorus uptake and cause that purple plant or stunted plants as well. So it's important to dig things up, do a true diagnosis, and understand what we're looking for and what we're looking at. Now when it comes to corn seedling diseases, the two most common ones are Pythium and Fusarium. So we'll dive in there. So with Pythium is most associated with the seed rot, seedling blight in corn. What we're going to see is that kind of neck down, rotted, slimy mesocotyl. So that's really where those lesions are going to occur most. And this is again going to be high moisture, low temperature. So cool soils and saturated soils is where this is most prevalent in field, okay? So it requires those wet soils to produce those infecting spores, and really it's going to infect any time from when the planter's first rolling in the field into some of those early V stages, vegetative stages of the plant. When we look at Fusarium, you can see the symptomology here is more of that discoloration, the dark black, completely rotted roots, even to a slight brown. But really, when plants are under stress, think moisture stress, heat stress, some of those conditions where the plant's really struggling, that's where it's going to be more prone to susceptibility of the pathogen. And we'll talk about management on this one. We have some good ways to help protect and manage that as we move forward. The last one I'll touch on for corn is Rhizoctonia. So brown lesions on the mesocotyl, really all the symptomology again for this is below the soil line. From a standpoint of where this is most common is more in the coarse to medium textured soils. Irrigated acres seem to be a little bit more prevalent, but looking at warm temperature requirements and moist conditions, not saturated, but moist conditions is where we're more likely to see Rhizoctonia. So when we talk about control methods, just a quick call out down here with enhanced disease control. That's our EDC package, and what that is, that's given us better control for Fusarium and Rhizoctonia in the early to mid-season, okay? Now, where we're getting that is from the prothioconazole and fluoxystrobin at that high rate. So those two parts of our fungicide package at the high rate giving us great control for Fusarium and Rhizoctonia. Now, from a metalaxyl standpoint, that's giving us that great Pythium control. So covering those three key seedling diseases that we run into year in and year out. So when we think about conditions we've been in the past and we've ran into some of these stand issues related to seedling diseases, if we're in a corn-on-corn environment, if we've built up inoculum and we know we have these pathogens, I'm going to be looking to get a hybrid with EDC on it to make sure I have that control, and I'm putting my best foot forward to get the best plant stand so I can get the highest yields. So I appreciate spending time with you guys today. One last thing, thank you, and if you have not had a chance yet, feel free to follow the TAs on Twitter or any of the other social media pages. If you're on Snapchat, the DeKalb MN West account, feel free to add that if you've not already. We try to do some in-season updates from the field, just quick things, what we're seeing, whether it's pest, disease-related, product highlights, any of that, so feel free to follow. And again, thank you guys. I look forward to the planting season as well as the rest of the growing season. Be safe.